If you struggle with binge eating and don't know how to stop, let's look at why you might be doing it. My name is Elle, specialist eating disorder and sports dietitian, and I'm going to tell you why binge eating has nothing to do with willpower and everything to do with human physiology. Firstly, what is binge eating? Binge eating is the consumption of large quantities of food in a short period of time, and it is often associated with a loss of control around food and can be followed by a period of restriction in order to compensate or make up for these episodes. Characteristics of binge eating can include eating faster than normal, eating past comfortable fullness, obsessing over food, eating large amounts of food when not physically hungry, eating alone, and feeling guilt or embarrassment about binging. Binges can sometimes be planned or happen as a result of losing control around food. Binge eating can be part of an eating disorder called binge eating disorder or BED, and this is actually the most common clinical eating disorder. Someone who binge eats at least once per week for at least 3 months is likely to be diagnosed with binge eating disorder. So, what causes binge eating? The 4 most common causes of binge eating are 1. Physical restriction, 2. Psychological restriction, 3. Emotions, and 4. Habits. So, let's look at number 1. Physical restriction. Physical restriction describes limiting our overall calorie and nutrient intake. Our body doesn't like change and doesn't know the difference between famine and an intentional diet. So, when it perceives food as limited, there are a series of biological changes that occur in an attempt to protect the body. Our hunger hormone ghrelin often increases when we diet, and the hormone which signals to the brain that we are full, leptin, decreases. This means that we can experience extreme hunger and a delayed sensation of fullness, which increases the likelihood of us eating past comfortable fullness levels. Frequent or long-term dieting can result in getting used to ignoring or suppressing these signals, which can sometimes lead to feeling insatiable hunger once you start eating. Leaving long periods between meals can result in becoming overly hungry, which can lead to binging at later points in the day. This is also similar to restricting your intake or being good throughout the week and then binging on the weekends. The next type of restriction is commonly associated with dieting as well, and that's mental or psychological restriction. And this refers to any rules or conditions that you may have around food. If I told you not to push the red button, I can guarantee you that you probably hadn't realized there was a red button, but now all you're doing is thinking about pushing that red button. And the same thing happens when we diet. The moment you tell yourself you can't or shouldn't have a certain food, you might find that you're thinking about it and craving it a lot more than you normally would. When we put food into categories like good and bad, healthy, unhealthy, allowed or off limits, we create a very black and white mindset around food. And this is often why we see people fall off their diets. When we eventually allow ourselves to have a food that is off limits, because let's be honest, you're not going to avoid chocolate or bread or whatever it is forever, the scarcity mindset kicks in. This can lead to thinking, I need to make the most of this opportunity to eat this food because I normally am not allowed to eat it. And so you binge on it. Also, having morals attached to food, like food being good or bad, can transpire onto how we feel about ourselves when we eat that food. This can mean that when we do eat a food that we consider bad, we feel shameful and guilty, and this can result in feeling like you've already ruined your diet, you may as well keep going and binge on all the foods that you've restricted, with the thoughts of starting again fresh tomorrow or on Monday. But this is what sustains the binge eating cycle. Restricting our intake or having the mentality that we need to cut out certain foods or food groups is what creates the urge to binge. Going back to physical hunger, restricting after binge actually reinforces the fear of the body, which is that there is a famine imminent, and your body will do everything in its power to ensure that you eat what you can whilst you have the opportunity to. When we create these food rules and subsequently break them, it erodes trust within ourselves, and this can lead to frustration and low self-esteem. We believe that we can't trust ourselves around certain foods, and this gives us even more reason to restrict and avoid that food. This can create fear and anxiety around foods too for some people, which severely impacts quality of life. Another reason why people may binge is in response to emotions. It is the most normal thing in the world to find food comforting. Eating is emotional, and it isn't just associated with negative emotions like stress or sadness. Food can be associated with positive emotions too, like nostalgia and social occasions. Food is rewarding and pleasurable, and it can be a way of expressing love and other emotions too. From the moment we are born, we associate food with comfort. Babies associate being fed either by a bottle or the breast with being held and comforted by their parent. Eating in response to emotions is not inherently bad. It only becomes a problem if it is our only coping mechanism. When we eat in response to emotions, we are likely to overeat or even binge, because eating provides relief from the emotion in many ways. Negative emotions may lead to a feeling of emptiness or an emotional void, and food can be seen as a way to fill that void and create a false feeling of fullness. Eating can also serve as a distraction from uncomfortable emotions or a stressful situation. But equally, we can also learn that eating helps us to feel good. Serotonin is released after eating carbohydrates, which can create a feeling of calmness, and this is known to improve our moods. Dopamine and noradrenaline are released after eating proteins, and these enhance concentration and alertness. But dopamine is also associated with learning rewards, and noradrenaline plays a role in our body's stress response. When we eat in response to emotions or a certain situation, we improve how we are feeling momentarily, and it provides an escape from whatever we are dealing with. However, this is short-lived, as when we stop eating, the emotion which we were trying to avoid is still there, which is why a binge may occur in order to continue to suppress these emotions. Emotions can also sustain the binge restrict cycle, as number one, it is likely the triggering emotion will continue to come up, as we're not actually dealing with it by binging, we're just distracting ourselves from it or suppressing it. But number two, after a binge, people tend to feel emotions such as guilt, shame, or disappointment, and this can further drive the desire to binge in an attempt to comfort ourselves from this uncomfortable emotion. And finally, when binging has gone on for a while, it can become habitual. In the same way that we create associations with food and positive or negative emotions, some people can associate certain foods, situations, times, or days with binge eating, and in this way, binge eating can become a habit. If binge eating is habitual, it is important to identify any correlations between binges and certain foods, environments, or other external factors. Often, habitual binges can be linked to emotions and rules around food too. Remember, there is a difference between overeating every now and then and binge eating compulsively. If you struggle with binge eating, ensuring you're nourishing yourself adequately and not leaving long gaps in between meals is vital, as dieting increases the likelihood of binge eating. Diet culture also enforces many food rules upon us, and stepping away from these and challenging your beliefs around food is one of the fundamentals to preventing binging on certain foods. If binge eating occurs as a result of emotions or habits, it is important to identify these emotions and honor them accordingly, as food is only a temporary solution and these emotions will continue coming up. Active distractions and planning ahead for when you feel binge urges can be really useful when dealing with emotional or habitual binge eating too. As I mentioned, some degrees of binge eating can be considered a clinical eating disorder and require the support of a multidisciplinary team like a dietitian, a psychologist, and a GP. If you need support, you can check out some of the resources listed in the description below. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe to the Myprotein YouTube channel for more great evidence-based nutrition information.